Well, I appreciate you guys coming on such an important topic. I spoke on this last year, and I had the pleasure recently. I was at my wife's school psychologist, or trainer of school psychologists, and so I needed some CEUs and went along to her national conference with her out in Seattle. And one of our mutual friends is a professor down at University of Lincoln. You may have seen, or University of Nebraska at Lincoln, you may have seen some references to her. She's been on the Today Show. She's been on, she was on tour with Lady Gaga, actually in the van that went to each, until Lady Gaga got hurt and had to cancel her tour. She was on the Respect bus that was at actually each tour event. And we were really fortunate in the state of Nebraska to have someone that is such a strong advocate for bullying, research into how to treat bullying, how to prevent bullying, and how to educate kids how to handle the situations when we, the adults, are not around. So her name is Sue Swearer, Dr. Sue Swearer, and you'll see her name referenced on some of the slides. I pirated a few of them with her permission, of course. So that's the reference with Sue on there. So I think she was really bummed. She was wanting to relive her teenage days as a groupie and follow Lady Gaga for longer than she got to. So we're going to talk about bullying. I'm relatively informal when I speak, but given the format that we've got 3 or 4 different venues that we could be getting potential questions for, I will try to hold the questions till the end, and we will stay on time for those of you that have commitments outside of here. We'll definitely stay on time. The 3 characteristics of bullying. I haven't looked at these slides, some of these slides in a little while, so I'm going to cheat a little bit while we're looking at them together. It's aggressive behavior that involves a negative or unwanted action, and the behavior is repeated over time, and there's an imbalance of power or strength. I think all of us would probably have given a rough description pretty similar to that. We may have given some specific breakouts if we were talking about cyberbullying or intimidations or threats as compared to the actual fact here. But remember, these are the 3 main characteristics. It's aggressive, and it's negative, and it's repetitive, so it's usually not a single episode when we're defining it. And there's usually an imbalance of power and strength, so it's not equal forces competing for an outcome when we're looking at this. The types of bullying: verbal, social isolation, physical, rumors, property being taken, forced to behave poorly, sexual bullying, cyberbullying, racial bullying. These are the top number of groups that are mentioning in terms of type of bullying. You can probably all come up with examples of this, either that haven't happened in the schools that your children go to or that you work at, or even those of us that go back to our days when we were in school. We didn't have the cyberbully, at least I didn't. Some of you are young enough to have that. But the reason I put this slide up is here. Bullying is not just the traditional one in the playground, hey, give me your lunch anymore, and I'm going to beat you up if you don't give it to me, or threaten, hey, go pick on that kid. If you don't do it, then there's going to be consequences for you. And I think one of the scarier parts of the cyberbullying is that people can say things that they don't have to say to somebody's face. And we're going to talk a little bit more detail about that. Texting in general is kind of a scary thing, or sexting, or those sorts of factors that are going on, because it gives a little bit of anonymity to it, so you don't have to own the behavior quite as much, even though it is very traceable, as we find. But it still, I think, gives people a little more, or kids, a little more license to cross over a certain line. So we've got a variety of types of bullying. How frequently? 77% of secondary students report being bullied. Now, when I look at that number, I'm kind of like, well, really, 77%? I don't know. When I was in school, the number probably wasn't, I wouldn't have anticipated it quite that high. But remember, we're talking about reported bullying ever. So some kids, by the time they grew to be 6'4" and 250, by the time they were juniors in high school, they might have been a little different when they were in 3rd grade. So, and our memory too. In any case, whether this number is exact or whether it's a slight elevation, kids still have a perception. 3/4 of the kids have a perception that they were mistreated. 15% have experienced 1 to 3 episodes in the last month. 3 to 4% have experienced more than 3 episodes, 3.4%. And 50% of these episodes go unreported. Frequently, I'll have kids, maybe those of you who talk to your own kids can imagine this scenario. I'll have a parent come into my office and the parent will say, well, little Jimmy's been getting bullied at school. And I tell him just to ignore it and it'll go away. And then without mom even giving a cue, Jimmy goes, see, Mom, that stuff's stupid. It doesn't work. I've been trying that. I can ignore them all along, but they still pick on me. And so unreported, 50% going unreported is partly because the strategies we give kids and the response we have in some of our institutions are almost, well, let them work it out, or, oh, bullying's not that big a deal. Oh, it's a rite of passage. It'll toughen people up. We've seen some big changes in what's happening with legislation on bullying. Think about it, some of the university campuses with the hazing that goes on in the fraternities and sororities. I know when I was a lot younger and going to school, it was pretty much you never read, unless a death resulted, you never read about a sanction that was going to a school for hazing in terms of at universities. Now there's schools being shut down, not schools being shut down, but fraternities being shut down, charters being revoked, because they're taking this stuff more seriously, and not even at the level of just loss of life. 30% of 6th through 10th graders report being involved in moderate or frequent bullying. That means either a victim, a bystander, or the bully themselves. 1 in 5 kids reported to be a bully or do something in a bullying action. 20% of our kids. So there's how many of you here? 12 to 15 of you here tonight. If we have, each of you had 2 kids, we would be talking 5 out of that 25 or so would be reporting that they had acted as a bully or done a bullying behavior. 160,000 kids miss school each day due to fear of bullying or response to bullying that occurred previously. Every 7 minutes, a child is bullied. 11% of these situations are resolved by staff. 4% get resolved by peers. 85% go unresolved. Every 7 minutes. And I think that, if we look at that 77%, that 7 minutes is probably even, it's probably much like every 1 minute or something like that in terms of the frequency that we get into. But sometimes when I do a talk about bullying, people want me to focus completely on the victim of the bully situation. Because a lot of times the parents that come in the audience are here to advocate for their kids. They want to know about programs. They want to know what the school can do. But if we're really going to address bullying effectively, we need to address three different players from a kid standpoint in a bullying situation. We need to address the bully, we need to address the victim, and we also need to address the bystanders or the contributors. Because that's how we stop bullying. Research has shown that if we just punish the bully, or we just help the victim, or we ignore the bystanders, that the intervention effectiveness of that program is very short-term and limited. So if we can help all three. Why do kids bully? Need for power, satisfaction in hurting others. That sounds horrid, but some kids are that way, or at least they're behaving that way. And students that are bullied are rewarded. This is what the research literature has shown us. These are the main reasons. A lot of times kids that do bully obviously have been victims of bullying themselves, or they're perceived victims of bullying, or they have situations that they need to get power elsewhere. Impact on victims. What did that go through? Impact on bullies, excuse me. Fights, stealing and vandalizing, risk-taking behavior, poor grades, and negative attitude towards school staff. When we chart the behavior of bullies, kids that do take bully action, they're higher frequency in demonstrating all these behaviors than kids that are victims or kids that are bystanders. This was a chart that was developed when we look at bullying and the impact of it. We cannot ignore, when we're looking at this, let's say H is or let's say D is the victim here, the 2 main perpetrators, the people around the outside, or even if we reverse it, depending on some indirect bullying, all the players in this situation, when we have school programs or we do interventions, we want to try to help all the players in the situation, because if we just affect one component of this, the other 2 components can still do the bully dance. Somebody, oh wait, he's not bullying him today, but wait, everybody always bullies him, so I'm going to jump in. Or the bystander witnessing a bully event, and they go home and they feel bad. I've had parents, come in, bring their kids in that their child's never been bullied and never been a bully, but yet they don't want to go to school because they're kids that care about other kids, and they feel like they're in this situation where they don't like it that little Jimmy's being picked on the bus. But they're afraid to speak up because if they speak up, they don't want it to be them. Or they think that kid has more power, or that kid's parents has more power, so they don't want to say anything, so they don't want to go to school. And you're like, well, and kids aren't real comfortable sometimes telling that's why. So we can't just target the bully and the victim. The bystander role. It's important with bullying to have open discussions. Unfortunately, right now, due to the young man's situation, and I'm not involved in the situation. I'm not an attorney. I'm not in any way related to the situation. Okay, so I've thrown out every caveat that I can be connected to it. But the situation that's happened in a small town in Iowa that has been making even national news with a bullying situation that occurred in a football practice where a young man was constantly hit over time, reportedly, with a football during practice and at other times, and it resulted in some severe damage. And bullying is in our limelight right now. Now, we don't want to create a bunch of everybody going on and saying, okay, everybody's bullying, we can't disagree, and we can't have conflicts. But the parents who have open discussions about bullying with their kids are parents that, if the parents make the conversations okay with their kids, then the kids are more likely, when they are at a bystander role, or before they're at a severe victim role, or before they're being pushed into a bully role, they're more likely to come to you and say, hey, Mom, when we were talking about that bullying thing, this has kind of happened. What do you think? So with a bystander role, and this is probably one of the safer ones to start with, unless you've got clear evidence that your son or daughter is being bullied, or you get clear evidence that they have been a violator of bullying, if I'm going to open a discussion with a youngster, I'm going to start with a bystander role. Because more than likely, that's a safer way to enter the discussion of bullying. It's definitely more than likely a safer way. And more than likely, they've probably been a bystander. The frequency of kids that have been a bystander to bullying is much higher than either they've been the victim or they've been the acting out one. So such questions, have you been with a friend that is being bullied? How did your friend feel? What was the lasting impact? How did you feel? How did your friend respond? What could they or you have done differently? What would you do next? Now, one of the things I do for my job is I train new psychologists, and so I've been doing this a long time. And I'm kind of scared whenever I give new psychologists questions to ask little kids and adolescents. You're like, well, why? Isn't that what psychologists are supposed to do? We are. But we're lousy listeners. We're great question answers. And so when I see these questions, and I have parents do questions for me too, you guys, and I hope I'm just preaching to the choir here and I'm wrong on this, but most of us don't wait for our kids to answer. Or we take the first answer that our kid gives us and we're like, okay, we got over that topic and now we've had that conversation and we can move on. Unless you've got an incredibly open, honest, relaxed, great relationship with your kid, they're not going to give you their true answer till about answer number 3. Maybe answer number, if they're a teenager, you might tell you answer 4 or 5. So when you start to have these discussions, do not be afraid of silence. I see far too many, okay, it's like a checklist. It's like you're checking, do you have things for the vacation list? Do you have this, do you have this, do you have this? Okay, or going to baseball practice. You got your cleats, you got your glove, you got your bat, you got your water, you got your uniform, hat. Okay, good, we're out the door, and we move on. If you're going to take time to have this discussion, give it the time it deserves. Do it in a time where there's not going to be a lot of distractions, and it's very safe to start with the have you seen bullying. Characteristics of bullies. They've often witnessed or experiencing bullying at home. Oftentimes, these youngsters are impulsive or easily angered. Now, that situation is if they're impulsive and easily angered, they probably cross that line of aggression more frequently, so there's less of a taboo. I mean, anything we do, even if it's something we're nervous about, if we're nervous about an elevator or a high spot, if we do it again and again and again, unless something bad happens, we become more comfortable with it. And so when we've got kids that are already going this way, most bullies show very little empathy. It's not always the physically strong with boys. In fact, I would say probably 1 out of 3 in my experience with kids is especially up through junior high, that oftentimes it's one of the scrappier little guys that, people are looking at him saying, well, I could, kick his butt, or I could take him down, but it's not the kid that necessarily is, the other kid that the high status kid or the large kid. And these kids do have a strong need to be in control or a strong need to dominate. Characteristics of victims, and I use the word victims there because that's what the literature uses. I don't like to define people by their limitations. So when I look at kids that have been bullied, I don't necessarily like to think of them as a victim. I like to think of them as somebody who needs to learn how to advocate for themselves, or somebody that we need to give to support so that they can handle those situations, because we want them to develop that interpersonal assertiveness and that resilience to be able to not appear in a way that they could be vulnerable to the bullying. Oftentimes these kids are more cautious, insecure, withdrawn, and shy. The characteristics show that, and this is a chicken and an egg thing, anxious or depressed. Well, if you were being bullied every day, or someone was taking your Snickers bar or your Mountain Dew, or was pushing you in your locker, well, are you anxious or depressed because you were anxious and depressed and somebody is bullying you? Or are you like, hey, I want my Snickers bar, and you keep taking it from me every day? You took my Snickers bar every day, I would be, at least irate or anxious or something. It wouldn't be a good thing. Oftentimes, increased risk for self-harm or retaliation. And the kids that are probably some of the biggest victims in bullying, or the biggest kids that are acted against, are ones that don't have good allies. They don't have other kids to walk home from school with. They don't have somebody else that sits on the bus, or all their friends that year are in the other class, or the adults in the school don't really know who they are. They're not as connected, so they don't have that sort of anybody watching out for them, so they appear more on an island, and they can often appear more vulnerable to the individual who would act on the bullying. Girls bullying. Girls do bully. Did any of you guys ever read the book Queen Bees and Wannabes? If you have an adolescent daughter, it's an oldie but goodie, but it talks about just some of the mother-daughter situations that go with a hierarchy of pre-adolescent girls, and some of the bullying that can happen. And I think it's a really nice conversation starter for parents that have that tweener girl, and there's the drama that's coming on early and earlier these days. It's a really cute read. So middle school, 5th to 8th grade. A lot of times the kids that are doing the bullying in girls, they have status. They're typically well-liked and popular. Girls are much more likely than boys to bully in a group. And the impact on the victims is we'll often see a drop in grades, poor eating standards, depression, and low self-esteem. If you think about when that's happening in junior high, bullying, especially in this situation, can be very vulnerable to a kid's self-image, because prior to junior high, most kids are driven to please adults and to please authority figures. They may not always do it, okay, but their bread and butter of their self-image and their self-worth comes from making mom and dad happy and making the teachers happy. Well, there's a shift that occurs in junior high. Now, not that all kids don't care about what mom and dad thinks, but there is an amount of shift where these kids go to all of a sudden start thinking, well, it's more important what my friends think. It's more important what Susie thinks. Or it's more important what I think, being the 5th to 8th grade girl. So they're at a kind of a situation where they're all of a sudden discounting your support and your opinions, and they're seeking it from others. And if they're those kids that remember that alphabetical letter that I put up there, if they're the kids that see 8 or 9 kids around them bullying them, even though only one's saying it or 2 are saying it, but the other 6 are sitting there going, no, what are they thinking? Time when they're needing self-image. That's why these kids can be very vulnerable during that time, and that's why we need to do education there, because these girls may not end up with a black eye. They may not end up with a torn shirt. They may not end up with evidence that we would see if a boy was being bullied, or some of the little short films we've seen over the years in different countries about bullying episodes where there's fights and arguments. That's not so much. Not that there's not some hitting with the girls, but it's during that time of formulation of self-image, and they're getting that sort of, well, not only does she not like me, but 8 other people are standing around her doing nothing and ripping on me. Cyberbullying. 42% of kids report cyberbullying, 25% more than once. 35% report being threatened online, 20% more than once. 21% received mean or threatening email. 53% report being critical of others. 58% don't tell the parents when this happens. Why is this slide up here? This slide is up here because if your kids are cyber connected, which I assume they are, if they're like most kids, and you don't know what they're doing, and you don't know who's talking to them, and you don't have an idea what's going on, you do right here. You're going to say your kid's not a potential victim in one of these areas, then I think you're making an assumption that's probably not in your kid's best interest. Kids eventually get over us being involved in their cyber world. They're going to fight and argue it, saying, no, this is my privacy, this is my privacy. Hey, you're my kid. You have privacy issues. I'll allow you certain privacies. This is not one of them. The cyber world allows people, not even ill-meaning people, but it allows people to shoot out a rumor or to shoot out a comment that can destroy a kid's self-image with just the touch of a button. Okay? That's different than having to walk over to their house like we have to do, knock on the door, say, hey, can Mike come out and play? Hey, Mike, I think, okay, that's a lot of effort. Push a button, 20 miles away, 50 miles away. I've had kids that come in with their pictures. They'll put a very innocuous picture. I mean, maybe they went to their 8th grade dance, and they put a picture of them in their dress. And they'll get 10, 15, 20 comments. Oh, you're ugly, you're fat, or that dress is stupid. Wow, don't be ignorant to this and blame other people for the problems. I mean, we can't control other people. We can control what our kids have access to. I'm not saying don't give them access to it, but make sure they're ready to have access to it, and make sure it's filtered and monitored access. These numbers are just, they're not lying. And these are what kids are reporting. Kids tend to underestimate something like this because they don't want to rat somebody out. They're afraid you're going to ask them who it was and what they did, or somebody's going to look at their test. So cyberbullying can happen 2 ways, the direct attack and the by proxy. Both of them are equally dangerous. It's the content that can be dangerous. Direct attack is almost, for some kids, direct attack is almost more treatable in helping them understand, well, what's that girl like at other times? Or what's that boy like at other times? How does that boy treat other people? Well, poorly, they always have an attitude, they're always in trouble at school. Okay, so it doesn't sound like they have a lot of value. So how come you're giving their comment a lot of value? We do that as parents all the time to help them. We devalue the person that took the strike, or that didn't invite them to their birthday party, or in this case, dissed them in cyberspace. When it's by proxy, where did it come from? I can't believe she doesn't like me. I would understand it if he said it, but she, wow. And you think how kids around that age think? One of the things they do is they do a lot of all or none thinking. Oh wait, if she doesn't like me, then that means nobody likes me. And then they start getting negative attitudes. The idea that sometimes when people are on a diet and it's all or none thinking, and they go to the ice cream box and they take a scoop of sherbet and they taste it and they go, oh, I already blew my diet, and they go ahead and eat half the canister. Instead of what you'd like your kids to be able to say is, oh, or our adults, hey, good thing I still like the taste of ice cream. Go ahead, check that out. Put the lid back on and put it back in the freezer. Our kids don't do that very well. If they got people disrespecting them and we're not supporting it, they almost think that, well, mom and dad aren't saying anything about it. Stay connected. Direct attacks, stealing passwords, text harassment, websites, sending malicious codes, pictures, impersonations. You've all heard. I'm not going to bore you with stories. I remember back, though, when the internet and email and all this stuff was first getting started. And I remember a situation where there was a student at a school that stole, well, he didn't steal. He figured out his teacher's password because the teacher used his first name is his username and his last name is his password. It was early on in the cyber world, okay? And this student, think about not having any self-control or any victimization, represented himself as that teacher in a very malicious way to other staff members. And this was just on the edge of when we were starting to have the technology to be able to trace something to, and it almost really ruined this teacher's career because of a situation. So, people, I don't know, this kid was a pretty rough kid, and he definitely was he was a kid that would do pretty aggressive assaults, but I think the fact that he could do this behind cloaked doors and realize that he was potentially ruining somebody's life along with all the other people that he did when he sent this out was very difficult. And I have kids all the time coming in with the text harassments or the difficult boyfriends or people doing impersonations and representing them in carryover attacks on others. They can actually, I just, stay away from these groups with your kids. I don't, we know this stuff. I mean, that's not about bullying. That's just about being smart. Bullying, cyberbullying, and suicide. Conventional victim. You're finding that we see increased risk here. When you're a victim and you're a victim of bullying, and this came out of some of Sue's work where she reviewed it, but the basic idea here is that as kids are more likely to be bullied, they're more like, especially in that junior high age, where they're starting to think, their self-esteem is being more vulnerable and it's being developed. Okay, this is not just sitting at home at night and crying in your bed because you think one of your friends dissed you. This is actually trying an attempt to harm themselves, higher numbers than what we would see in the general population. Analysis of the youth risk study, odds for ratio of suicide attempts, depression at 6.3, convictional victimization 2.1, cyber victimization, there was not non-statistically increase. But the whole idea, we get variance in suicide attempts explained by these predictors is about 22%. So if we've got a depressed kid and they're being bullied, and I don't know, once again, it's the chicken and the egg here. If I've got a kid that's being bullied frequently, or has been being bullied for a long time and I didn't know it, and then all of a sudden I find out about it because it was subtle bullying and then it became greater, and I've got a young person that's depressed and there's ongoing assaults on them from their peers, either cyber or verbal, I'm going to monitor that kid. And I'm going to want to make sure you get them treatment and try to get in there, not just because I want to rescue them, but because I don't want it to result in them attempting something that we don't like to see or read about. Warning signs of bullying, obviously damaged or missing clothing, physical injuries. I did have to lighten the mood a little bit. I had a kid or a parent bring in this kid the other day and said, a young man the other day, and said, I know the kid's being bullied. He went on an overnight and he came home with just one shoe. I said, wow, you must run a very different ship in your house if all the kids leave with what they brought to the thing. And I asked the young person, so where's your shoe? Oh, we were playing this game where we were out in the backyard and we were, kids will throw their shoes up over the wire and hang them up there. And it was a clothes wire that was higher than they could reach. And one of mine got stuck up there because I threw it too hard and my tie came undone and it got stuck up in the tree, so it's sitting in the tree. I don't think he's being bullied. I think he was having fun. So don't overreact, but long illogical routes home, reduced interest in school, few friends, school avoidance, somatic complaints, reduced appetite. If you see any of these things in your kids, I'm a psychologist that doesn't treat just bullying or victims of bullying. If you see any of these in your kids and their patterns, ask them what's going on and listen to their answer. Don't answer it for them. Give them some time to respond. What adults can do, we can be a positive role model. If we come home and act like a victim from our boss or from our work, or we complain, or we talk about retaliation, or we talk about getting even, or we talk about how horrible things are without promoting solutions, if we're derogatory and negative towards others and our kids bullying, oh, it's all right for me to do, my situation's different. No, it's not. Kids look at you. Work with youth to help pro-social behavior. I think athletics, academics, music, any involvement where you can teach sportsmanship and fairness. Show choir Those are pretty cutthroat competitions, okay? But if you can teach kids to cheer on the other team and be fair to the other team, and even if some school gets up there and, gosh, they're not that good, instead of going, oh, they stink, or oh, they're horrible and we rock, go, wow, that's really cool that they're trying to learn how to be a good show choir. I wonder if they've got somebody that's helping them out. We're real lucky. We've got a coach that, wow, really knows what's going on with show choir. Model that. Don't assume that it's going to happen. Don't participate in shaming the victim or blaming the bully. Now, I work a lot here on excuses. I'm not very tolerant of excuses. I'll look for reasons as long as they lead to solutions. And that's what I encourage kids to do when they're in my office. They can tell me that there's a challenge or there's a problem, but then if they start to use that as an excuse to do this or not do that, I'll say, stop. You did a great job when you started there. You came up with the idea that there's a problem here. Now let's come up with a solution. What can we do? Not, oh, I'm getting bullied at school, I can't go back. No, wait, that's an excuse. You're entitled to an education, you need to get it. We've got a problem here. Let's come up with a solution. Okay, work with schools personnel and parents, not against each other. I've had situations where parents have gone into school meetings and they walk in a bully situation and there's three school staff sitting on one side of this table and 3 school staff sitting on the other side. Pretty clear that there's an adversarial situation here. When they're talking, it's just like kind of lines are being drawn. So try to work with the school. Help the youth develop appropriate and assertiveness skills. There's a whole literature out there on interpersonal assertiveness, which is teaching kids to appropriately say no. I think that if you can incorporate interpersonal assertiveness in your youth, especially in terms of handling drugs and alcohol and sex and stealing and other poor choices or risk-taking that we may take when we're in adolescence, the interpersonal assertiveness literature is awesome. It really teaches us some good resilience skills. Monitor friendships and use of technology. Don't be caught out in the dark on this. Keep open line of communications between you and the youth. Because you've asked once, don't assume that it's all done and over with. And if a kid says, oh, no, it's no big deal. Well, what do you think the reason is it's no big deal? And when I'm talking to kids about all this stuff, I completely remove the word why from my vocabulary. In fact, I think communicating with youth in general, the word why should be stricken from our conversation. Because what's the most common response when we get to why? IDK. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Or the kid thinks it goes, well, I could give them a reason, but that's not going to sound good enough. So what reason do they want to hear? Okay, I'm going to tell them that. Really? Really? No. Get rid of why. It doesn't help. And seek additional support and services for youth involved in bullying. Don't just assume it's something they're going to outgrow or somebody's going to be big enough to come along and deck them, the bully, and then they're going to get rid of them, because bullying is like a pyramid scheme. Okay, no matter which part in the chain of a bullying situation you figure, the pyramid of somebody else has said, oh, send $5 to this friend, $1 to this friend, $10 to this friend. If you find one pod in the bullying scheme, it's likely that it's not an isolated episode. It's kind of like an ant. If you find an ant in your house, you don't have just one ant. Help bullies own their actions. What did you do? I don't really like why it was wrong. It was on a protocol that we used. What was wrong about this? Who did you hurt? What was your goal? What can you do to change without hurting? In little kids, I start early on with little kids when they're starting to do bullying. We'll do creative storytelling, or if you can find storybooks, sometimes different churches or different agencies have books that are based on certain themes of behaviors, pro-social behaviors we want to see with kids. Use those if they're consistent with your other teachings, but don't just use them and then stop at the story. Take that story and say, well, let's tell a story that's like that maybe has some kids in your neighborhood or some kids in your school. Because one of the things we know very clearly about social skill groups, in the 70s and 80s, these social skill groups where we'd bring kids in and teach them social skills, we thought, oh, wow, this is awesome. Parents loved it. Kids had fun because they got pizza parties afterwards and stuff like that. Okay? We thought they were great. They had great face validity. In other words, people rated them afterwards. That was awesome. We actually felt like we learned something. Well, what we found when we actually did evidence-based practice, when we would study the effectiveness of some of these, the majority of these social skill groups, they were very effective when they were done in the school with the kids that that kid interacts with on a daily basis, and when they were maintained across time. So we found when they were done outside of the school with other kids, they weren't quite as effective. And we found when they were started and had 3 or 4 sessions and we ran out of money, or the counselor couldn't work on Wednesday night anymore, or the coach started a game and couldn't have people involved in the group and the groups broke apart, the behaviors didn't remain. They went back to where they were before. So it's not just a shot in the dark one-time deal that we deal with bullying. It's an ongoing process. Teach our bullies to own their actions, acknowledge results of behavior on self, develop empathy and guilt. If I could do all these, I wouldn't be here. I would be living on an island somewhere enjoying millions. A lot of adults could learn to develop most of these skills in our work relationships. But hey, every guy can dream, can't we? At least we've got some goals there that we could think that we could reach towards. Yeah, we do. It'll be awesome. Develop delayed gratification. How many adults have that? I don't know. Not enough. Response to bullies, the ignore, walk away, the hold anger, the don't get physical, practice confidence, have the confidence to say no, take charge of your life, talk about it, find true friends. Now, for kids, these things are going to sound like, yeah, right. Timmy doesn't box you into a corner. Or you don't sit at my lunch table. You're an adult. These work for you, not me. These things do work. They don't work the first time. They're not going to work every time. But what they do is they start setting up a kid that if you give a kid a socially appropriate way to respond to a situation, 2 things happen. One is, the obvious, they respond in a socially appropriate fashion. 2 is what they don't do. They don't respond in a non-socially appropriate response. We're trying to break this cycle of the bullying. Now, walking away from it may not stop every kid from bullying, but maybe it stops a kid that's just starting to enter into bullying, or maybe it stops a kid that was being pushed into bullying from somebody else. And if you make it a little harder for that bully, maybe they're not going to start bullying. And maybe they're going to go back to the bully and say, this isn't very much fun. This isn't cool. We shouldn't do this. You don't stop bullying by the immediacy. This is the problem when we're trying to teach kids this. They want the fix right there. And I understand it. If somebody was taking my Snickers bar, I want to have a little trap that sits there and nails them, and then I can come release them, maybe, depending on how much they promise not to steal my Snickers bar from there on out. I want an immediate solution. But for bullying, there's not an immediate solution. There's not an ultimate punishment. There's not an ultimate prevention. It is teaching our kids that interpersonal assertiveness, that resilience, to help make bullying not fun, to help the bullies get an idea that they don't need control over other people. But we've got to do it by baby steps. Bullying, environmental change, autonomy, belonging, cause and effect. This is the overriding principle, the ABC of what we would like to see with bullying. It's really taking all those last 3 slides and putting them into 3 words. I put it there just as an easy way to remember the ABC concept here. But basically what we're trying to do is teach our kids, especially those junior high kids, we want to teach them interpersonal assertiveness and autonomy. So what, Susie says you don't look good in that dress. So what, Susie says your hair looks dumb today. So what, Susie says you're wearing Granimals today. Okay, well, great, that's Susie. Don't teach your parents then to say, well, your kids, oh, what's Susie wearing? Was she wearing sprockets or something? Don't go back there, because you teach that modeling and you make their behavior okay. So autonomy, belonging, kids who belong to things. I don't care if it's the band, if it's quiz bowl, if it's dance team, if it's the football team. Well, that was a bad choice in this recent environment. If they belong to something, they're much more likely to feel positive about themselves. They're much more less likely to be a victim of bullying. And they're much more likely to develop interpersonal assertiveness. And they're much more likely to have people around them. Kids from the band eat together. Kids that are going to the speech tournament that weekend eat together. Kids that have got the soccer game that night, they eat together, they hang together, they're talking about the game. It reduces the likelihood. The isolated kids are going to be more likely to be sought out by the bully folks. And cause and effect, gosh, if we can catch a kid walking away from a bully situation If we can catch a kid appropriately intervening as a bystander in a civility situation, and we can say, boy, hey, I saw you do that the other day. That was awesome. You made that kid's day. That was really cool the way you handled that. If we can do that as adults and catch them being good and catch them not partaking. Hey, I saw that guy trying to get you to do something that would embarrass that kid. God, I am so impressed the way you told him, no, that you don't roll that way. That wouldn't be a good idea. And if we're a teacher or we're a coach and we can catch kids doing that, wow, we can make them feel like rock stars because we can be specific and catch them being good. We need to change aggressive behavior. Some schools have built bully prevention committees, train the staff, maintain positive feeling environments and student-staff connection. There's plays that can come to schools that teach anti-bullying. Very specific plays, some of them related to bullying about sexuality, some of them related to bullying about racial situations, some are related to bullying about other individual characteristics that folks have. Address gender issues. Remember, girl bullying is slightly different than boy bullying typically, especially when we get that junior high. And we need to have staff-wide consensus about the response. My guess in situations where bullying is letting go on or victimization is letting go on, somebody's looking for one of the leaders to disapprove. If we wanted to go really out base and we wanted to look at the Penn State situation with all the allegations that came out of that, who knows what the whole exact, we're not there, we don't know everything that happened. But everybody kept saying, well, they didn't do anything. Well, they didn't do anything about it, and they didn't do anything about it. There was a long time before people stepped up, and that allowed that to get, allegedly, hugely out of hand. Change aggressive behavior, maintain school-wide reporting for aggression, school-wide rubric that is predictable, like in other words, a solution that's going to happen. Support reflective empathy, involve parents, support bystanders, show evidence of progress. Teach nonviolence and non-victim role, teach and model healthy safety assertiveness. Don't underestimate the pain of bullying. Get to know your friends' parents, your kids' friends' parents, and don't excuse the negative behavior. Some ideas for treatment of depression and anxiety and anger. These should be available in your handout. I've used a number of these books. For anxiety, the kid, remember one of that early descriptions up there? These kids might appear, some of the victims might appear a little anxious. This Coping Cat book, it is one we use really frequently in therapy for anxious kids. It's a really cool program, and it's very parent-friendly. It really is. It's available. It's a good book. The Overcoming Depression, look at that. If you're really going to use it, make sure it fits your kid's needs and make sure you don't need a mental health professional in there, but it's a good book. And then the Keeping Your Cool, the anger management workbook for kids that are having trouble with anger expression. I use that with kids that are having trouble with sports anger. Like the kid that when he strikes out, he may be great, but he strikes out and the bat's going down and the helmet's going flying across, but he's like the best player, and you're like, dude, you're like, what is this, second grade baseball? We just did coach pitch. You're not in the major leagues. You're not getting paid for this. Chill out. What are you going to be like when you actually lose a game that matters? We got to teach. We want them to still be competitive, but the anger's getting in the way of their playing. Besides that, we don't want to get hit in the ankles by bats and things. The Ultimate Guide to Preventing and Stopping Bullying, the Education Online or .com, there's a special issue on there, Bullying at School and Online. And then the U.S. government has a website called stopbullying.gov. Those resources have, as you would imagine, today's, this is the good thing about cyber world, those have connections and spinoffs and organizations and chat boards and a whole bunch of different avenues that you can go to get additional. There's an interactive video, Stories of Us. It's a unique series of educational for primary and secondary students. And these are children that have created this. It's one thing for us to sit there. When I train parents to play with their kids, yes, sometimes I have to train parents to play with their kids. But one of the things I'll teach them is if they're playing with their kid and they're doing what we call special time, and the kid misbehaves, and they get when the kid misbehaves, the parent disengages and then starts back again. If the kid misbehaves twice, the parent says, okay, we're done with special time today, and then special time is over. And the parent's like, well, wait, shouldn't I wash their mouth out? Should I make them clean up this? Should I make them do that? Well, no, because if that's a little 4-year-old, how do 4-year-olds tell each other that they don't want to play with their friend anymore? You were mean to me, I want to go home. They walk out and they realize they're bored at home because the cardboard box is over at their neighbors they want to play with. Hey, can I go back over to Jimmy's? Well, I thought you guys were just being, well, I know, but I'm bored. We'll be fine. I'm going to go back over there. So we need to teach kids at the level. So us telling them all this stuff about bullying versus them hearing it in peers' real world words has a lot more open to discussion and utility. Groundspark.org, that's another training and video piece that there's available for to go through bullying training. Sue's the keeper of all these, so she let me know about these. Braverytips.com, NASP, that was the conference I was at. And the Born This Way Foundation, that's the Lady Gaga hook in. They've got some really cool vignettes on there about what that bus was like and the idea of building your strengths, be brave, act brave, and stay brave. It's a very motivational component. So I'm trying to dump in like huge amounts of information on bullying, and what my goal was to, first of all, with all the statistics we threw out there, was to say, okay, this stuff is real. We can't put our heads in the sand and say it doesn't exist. It happens. It happens more often than we would like, more often than it should. We can also not think that it's not our kids. We also can't have the assumption that, oh, bullying's good for us, it toughens us up. The people that think that way are the people that maybe did survive a bullying situation or didn't really have it to the level where the kids that are actually the true ones that are hurt by it and hurt by it severely, we don't remember it that way even if we were that kid. Bullying does have significant consequences. And when we're looking at bullying, the third point that I wanted to make is, I know it's when we see a video or we see something like that, we want to go in and we either want to punish the victim or we want to indict the school for not noticing it and managing it, and we want, or not punish the victim, punish the perpetrator or whatever, and we want to show empathy for the victim. I'm all for the empathy for the victim, don't get me wrong, we need that. But we also need to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to help that bully not keep doing that? What was so tragic in that person's life that they actually would go to that level? What don't they get? Because if they're acting this way as kids, adult bullies aren't any more accepting than teenage bullies. They're in your workplace. They're in your neighborhood. They just do it differently now, okay? And then we also need to look at the bystanders. That has an impact on our kids. Especially the sensitive, more aware kids that I talk to will just say, well, you know, God, what's the hardest part of your day? Well, the morning time. Well, what's tough about the morning? Well, there's this one kid that nobody likes, and everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of kids go by and they flip his desk, or they flick him in the back of the head, or they grab his book and they shake it. And I just sit there and I don't know what to do, because those kids are really popular and they're being jerks, but I tried to move away, but my teacher, would you tell your teacher why? Well, no, I couldn't really tell her why, because I'd get in trouble then, and then maybe the kid didn't want me to say this for him, and I don't want the other kids to then start doing it to me, and so don't ignore that potential of the bystander. And then the last part that I wanted to do was to emphasize that there are things that we can do. Although we may not have an immediate impact on the bullying, talking to our kids about it, being open about it, having discussions, letting them know that you're not going to fly off the handle when they come to you with something, that you're going to listen, not react. I have parents all the time that will come in and say, I just want my kids to ask me a question. And the kid comes with a difficult question, and the parent either gives them an answer from A to Z. Oh my gosh, there's a chance to talk to my kid. They came to me about something. And the kid's going, God, this is why I never ask them anything. I didn't want the whole encyclopedia. I just wanted this. You know? Or the parent flies off the handle. Well, I'm going to go. Well, that's the reason your kid didn't want to ask you this question. And there's a lot of great organizations, a lot of great information out about it. And I think sometimes schools get so overwhelmed, if they can have a parent that's a strong advocate for looking at some of these programs, that might make the difference in them getting to it. So I know we were going to try to do some questions. I talked too long. So are there any questions in this part of the audience first, and then I can hit Sherry up for if there are other ones. Any? Nobody's raised their hands yet. Come on. Well, I can repeat it. I can repeat it. There's mics up in the ceiling, too. Yes?
What's the youngest you've had a patient be bullied?
The question is, what's the youngest I've had a patient with bullying? I see a lot of bullying even in preschool settings. But usually things are more, hopefully in those settings, the kids are more underneath the watchful eye of whoever's there the majority of the time. And so usually that's more of a consultation where we would go in and say, okay, there's a lot of bullying in this classroom or in this daycare. What can you do to help it? Or if there's one kid that's the super bully that's raising havoc and he's out of the charts, then there's a group called Behave in Daycare. Oftentimes we'll send the younger kids there, and they do great programs with some of those bullies and give them ways to appropriately control their energy. So bullying can start early on, but remember, kids tolerate a lot in each other up to about age 6. And if you walk into a typical kindergarten classroom, kids are all over each other and they're just hanging out and they're grabbing each other's food and they're a lot more tolerant. When we start getting into first grade and halfway at least through first grade, ooh, I don't like the way you're acting, or that people start to notice differences. So, if we see extreme examples, I like to intervene early. But usually those kids are really, the kids that we would send there are kids that are aggressive across settings too. But like at baseball or at daycare. Other questions in this part of the room? Yeah.
Can you just give an example of how you would react to toddlers or preschoolers bullying each other? Like specifically a kid going up and hitting another kid constantly?
How would I react to consequence like the bullying of a kid going up and hitting another? First of all, I'd look for patterns. I kind of look at the situation. I do a functional behavior analysis first to see, okay, what is it that happened here? I try to look at it and see, did one kid come up and take the kid's prized possession from him and then push him down, and did I catch the retaliation? So I'm going to look for a pattern first. And then if I see patterns there, then I'm going to work on redirection and prevention, try to catch. We can't use language with most of the preschool and toddlers in terms of saying, that kid's not going to want to play with you anymore if you hit them. Really? What's that mean? And not going to play with you anymore? Does that mean they won't play with me for 5 minutes with the Tinker Toys, but they'll be fine if we're doing Lincoln Logs? So I try not to talk to an adult like an adult to them. I do a lot of prevention. Oh, okay, whoops, there looks like there's going to be about aggression. So we kind of move over here. And I try to teach pro-social behavior if I catch it. Hey, you did a good job being gentle there. Hey, you did a good job helping out there. With slightly older kids, we'll go to a strike system where they understand what an aggressive act is, and we'll say, okay, if you get 1 strike, and then 2 strikes, and if you get up to 3 strikes, you get an out, which is an out is kind of an exaggerated timeout where you go through a period without any privileges. But hey, if you, let's say the kid's being aggressive once an hour, if they're aggressive once, hour 1, but they're not aggressive in hour 2, they get to buy back that strike. So when they can understand the buyback principle, I'll go to the strike system. I like to promote rules in the classroom which are not just don't rules. I think one of the mistakes we make with kids from early on is we have the don't rules. I love walking into swimming pools where it says walk. Instead of don't run, walk. Instead of don't splash, keep your water to yourself. And research has shown that if we tell kids what to do and can catch them doing it, we're 10 times more effective than if we tell them what not to do and when they break that, punishing them. I'm not against punishment and consequences. I mean, consequences are real. We have to have them. But if we can tell them what they need to do and catch them being good. Oh, that was great the way you helped your sister. Oh, that was great the way you went and got that diaper. You were so gentle. Oh, that was really good. Catching them being good. It sounds a little patronizing to you and I, but not to little kids because they process language word for word. We process it in conceptualizations. And if somebody said that to us at work, oh, that was great the way you got the report done on time, we'd be like, ooh, that was creepy. So the key is when we're working with little kids, don't think like an adult. Think like an adult, but don't act like an adult, I guess is kind of where I'm going with it. Okay, and do we have some questions on?
A question that kind of comes off of the preschooler question. We have a mom on a chat with us through Mamaha on the World Herald who asks, how do you know if your preschooler is a bully versus maybe they just have a little independence or aggression that they're working through? How do you know if it's becoming a problem or could be a problem?
Well, the question is, how do we know if it's our kid or when's too much? And I think that goes to both ends, whether it be a child that we'll use the word victim because it's more simple to understand, or the bully. How do you know when they cross that line? And I do not have an exact answer for that. What I look for is I look for patterns, if it's happening across settings, if I'm starting to get phone calls on a pretty frequent basis that says, hey, Johnny had or my note home says, hey, Johnny had a rough day. I mean, it's simple, but I think when my dogs, when they go to daycare, I know one of them is going to be more aggressive. And so if I start getting notes on him that says at daycare today he did this and this, if I see one note, I'm not worried about it. If I start to see, each time he goes or every other time he goes, I see a note that he was aggressive, then I'm gonna work on the behavior. So once again, I look for patterns and I look for it across settings. If it's just in one setting, in one situation, then you might wonder what some of the dynamics of that, not that the situation's a bad situation, but for your kid, what are the dynamics of that situation that's difficult for them to handle, whether they're putting themselves in more of a victim role or finding themselves in more of a victim role. That won't imply that they intentionally victimize, or they're being more of the aggressor. Is there a way you can help them handle that environment differently without being aggressive, or help them be more assertive without being a victim of the aggression? We have time for 2 more minutes, so. Any other questions or any of you guys?
Otherwise, one.
Yeah.
Sorry, one other question from the chat. Talking about helping kids be involved or finding that group that they're comfortable with. Do you have any suggestions on how to get kids involved? Maybe especially elementary age boys, maybe not wanting to get involved or not finding that thing. Is there anything parents can do to help with that?
The question is, how do we encourage involvement? What I encourage parents to do along those lines is that kids need to be involved in at least, we don't need to overprogram our kids, okay? That's not what I'm saying. They have to be involved in 7 sports and 3 musical instruments and solving calculus at age 7, okay? But they need to be involved in something, and not just in relationship to bullying. But kids need to have some activity that they do. It does not have to be competitive. It does not have to be expensive. It does not have to be select. But they've got to do something where they interact with other people and they socialize, and there's some level of engagement. If it's not, maybe they don't do great at team sports. Maybe they do better in the swim team or tennis or something that was more individual where they're still around other kids. Or maybe they do better in destination imagination, or maybe they do better in the art club. I know schools are tight on budgets, but when you can find activities for the kids to be involved in, having something that they need to do, and saying, well, I don't want to go tonight. And then don't you use the out of saying, see, I sign you up for the stuff and you don't want to go. I know sometimes you don't want to go, okay? But you got to show that commitment. You got to show them that they need to stick with it. And if they learn how to, sometimes we got to teach our kids to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And actually when they get there, and I remember when I was growing up, and I remember the kids that, gosh, any sport that I played, there was always 1 or 2 kids, before they had select teams, there was 1 or 2 kids on the team that you were like, wow, I'm kind of nervous for them out there. Are they going to know what to do? And it's like watching the NCAA Final Fours when they play that one shining moment. I still remember a young man on one of my Little League baseball teams. He was out in right field, and he was like this, and that ball fell in his glove. I don't know by act of what, but he caught that ball. And it was the 3rd out of an inning, and we got to go back in. And that kid, he did not want to come to any practice. His dad made him come to every practice. He showed up, though, and that ball, the kid the whole rest of the year, I don't think he ever swung the bat the whole rest of the year, and I know he didn't catch anymore. But that kid's self-image, I remember it vividly, maybe as a psychologist as an elementary kid, but that kid was a different kid because he had participation in that, and he was part of a team, and he helped the team out there. So I don't think we have to have kids that have to be rock stars, but my rule is the research literature is so clear about depression and anxiety and isolation and all these factors, especially as we get up in school years. Kids that are involved feel better about themselves. The kids that feel isolated and uninvolved in a school, they're much more vulnerable to negative things themselves, and victims reaching out for them to make them more of a victim or making them part of a problem that's not a good thing. So how do I encourage it? It's required. I think too many times these days, when we're raising our kids, there's things that are required and there's things that are optional. I think somewhere along the line, a lot of parents got in the idea that everything's supposed to be optional. I wasn't optional when I was a kid. Now I got to choose. If I had an outfit that I looked silly in, I may have got to choose to wear it, but I couldn't wear it to church, or I couldn't wear it around people that, my parents were worried about what they'd think or something. But I could wear it out and play in the neighborhood or something. But when it was going someplace else, it was, no, that's not your outfit there, you're going to wear this. There was not an option. I'm not saying don't give kids options, but kids look to us and go, I'm really not going to have to do that? Oh, cool, Mom must not think it's that important since I don't have to do it. Don't let required become optional too often. We build resilience some way that way. I mean, we do things we're slightly uncomfortable, good things that we need to do, that we're slightly uncomfortable with every day. On our job, in our social relationships, we're kind of like, I don't know how this is going to go, but it's the right thing to do, and we do it. If every time we felt slightly uncomfortable to do something new, we didn't do it because our mom wasn't making us, I don't know, where would you be today? Probably not where you're at. So I think involvement's key. So, well, I appreciate you guys. We are out of time, and I know everybody came with an agenda tonight, and some of us probably need to get to vote yet and do other things. So I appreciate you taking time to come listen to me. And contact number's up there. You've got it in your packet. So let me know if I can help out in any way. So thanks a lot for your great audience. Thanks.